Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you. I'm Brent Fuel with the Water Finance Exchange, and we are grateful you could join us today. At WFX, we work every day with small and rural communities who are under real pressure. Pressure from aging infrastructure and workforce shortages to rising costs and more stringent regulations. We're seeing this across the country. Many communities are asking the same fundamental question. How do we keep water and wastewater services affordable, reliable, and compliant over the long term? And where do we even start? For a growing number of systems, voluntary regionalization, shared services, or other collaborative approaches are becoming a part of that answer. But these decisions are complex and they're really hard. They're not just about engineering, finance, or legal questions. They involve governance, local identity, trust, and timing, and that's where technical assistance providers play a critical role. Today's webinar is focused on how TA providers can help communities recognize when regional solutions should be considered, evaluate those options, and move forward if and when it makes sense and on their own terms. We're going to explore the barriers communities face, the opportunities that regional approaches can unlock, and how TA providers can better coordinate across the funding, planning, and capacity building. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a while. So we are very fortunate to have three of the nation's leaders on this topic, TA providers. George Hawkins, founder and CEO of Moonshot Missions. Olga Morales, CEO of the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and Charles Stevens, Senior Executive Policy Director for the National Rural Water Association. Welcome, you three. Very pleased that you could join us today. Each of you brings a unique and distinct perspective, but I think it's fair to say we all share a commitment to strengthening local water systems through practical and voluntary solutions. We're going to talk about that. Our goal today is very straightforward: to explore real-world insights that policymakers, local officials, utility leaders can use to support regional water solutions that do respect local communities while improving performance and affordability. And those that are calling in today, I just encourage you to ask. This is a topic, one that's of great growing interest in many states, and a topic. So please include any question that you have in the Q&A box, and I will do my best to get to them when we can. So on that, let's get started. Olga, I want to start with you. So given your many years of experience in the space, starting with your work in New Mexico, and I think which continues, most communities, when first introduced to the idea of consolidation, worry about a number of things, and namely losing their identity and control. And I'd love to hear your thoughts how you and RCAP help communities balance that local identity and autonomy while still pursuing regional or shared service models.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. This is a topic of great interest to me personally because I've done the work myself on the ground. To your point, Brent, I've been doing this kind of work for a number of years. I have personally been involved in regionalization for over 20 years at this point. To your question, how can technical assistance providers help communities recognize where regionalization, and let's get to the regionalization piece first before we talk about consolidation. I think that is one of the challenges that we have to recognize for those of us that work in the small system space. Our communities, our utilities across the country operate in a very reactive manner because they're dealing with the problems that they have in front of them. And so they don't know what they don't know. One of the things that technical assistance providers have the opportunity and the advantage to, and this is very true for RCAP TA providers across the country, is that we begin to see where those trends are. We begin to see where possibly they are all dealing with the same contaminant. They might be paying the same engineer, the same auditing firm, the same. And so a lot of times it's us starting to have those conversations with them, planting the seed in a very gentle way. Because I will say that to get to consolidation, we're talking possibly years in some cases, and it's a lot of trust building work over that time. So we start on the very non-threatening side about, do you know that your community also, or the community next door to you also has the same engineer, same this, same that, and the other, to where they can see where they can create partnerships that can benefit more than themselves. But again, it we have to recognize that communities that we work with are lacking staff, are lacking redundancy, and therefore are lacking context of what's happening outside of their own issues.
Yeah, thanks, Olga. Really important points. Charles, Olga talked about the difference between regionalization and consolidation. I think a lot of folks, see them as one and the same. Maybe you could, parse that out for us, help us to understand. It's more than just consolidation, right? More than asset consolidation. There's many other forms of shared services and regional solutions, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an important point to kind of to drill down into and bring out. You've got regional wide systems, you've got systems that have consolidated into one, and you've got a number of systems that have been successful because they were able to share services or share management, or share some contracting or procurement, all of those things that may have um, driven down their costs, but didn't require maybe a full-on merger or consolidating with another system or becoming a regional identity where you're still running your own system, but you're under an umbrella. There's so many different options and opportunities that it's so important that the TA providers understand that. And so when they get in there on the ground and they really begin to build trust with the community and can get in there and really start diagnosing the challenges and the problems, that they understand kind of the whole buffet or suite of services that are available. Because we all know each community is so unique in their challenges and also their opportunities, and that one size doesn't fit all. And so understanding what that is unique to that one particular community, one at a time, and then being able to provide the guidance that's going to be right for them is so important, looking at all of the different many options.
Yeah, Charles, I think that's such a good point. It's not a one size fits all, and there's many different approaches that can actually help communities work together. So, George, obviously this is a space you've worked in for a long time, from your times at DC Water to now at Moonshot Missions, and you guys are focusing on really kind of the operational challenges and perspectives that communities are having. What do you see as the biggest opportunities for the regional solutions, shared services, whatever you want to call them, to improve service delivery at a lower cost? And maybe you could provide us an example where, where that's, that you've really seen that bear fruit.
Sure. Well, first, delightful to be here today with you all. Charles, Olga, Brent, what a great lineup. Glad to be part of it. And what a fascinating topic. And I guess one of my first message I would deliver to those who have taken the time to listen in, thank you for joining us, is that this is a topic that is relevant to every utility at every size. What we all know in this profession is that the needs of a utility in these days is going up. Responding to new contaminants, responding to extreme weather, responding to dilapidated and aging infrastructure is increasing the financial need of the enterprise. At the same time, when the revenue coming in is limited. So how do we deliver the service in an affordable way? And that's the question that I think the entire sector is focused on, with this being one of the critical parts of the answer. The way we come at it, and by the way, this is how I came at it at DC Water, because even though DC Water is a very large utility, we faced the same thing. We had a $10 billion capital need and we had $3 billion of revenue. So we had $7 billion of unfunded work to be done. That's a story at scale of every utility. So we started searching for every way we could think of to reduce costs. That's a manner in which, so that's how Moonshot's actually why I stepped down from DC Water, was to offer that same perspective to some utilities. As Olga said, these are wonderful people working hard every day, but they have a hard time lifting up to see what else is possible. It's not because they aren't smart. It's not because they aren't good people. It's literally, they're so demanded from their time of what they're doing every day. Do they have the wherewithal, and who can help them in that context that doesn't have a stake? when Olga, Charles, Brent, you or us, when we're there, we're not selling we're not,
Yep.
there's no sales part of this. This is just experience and ideas. The way we do it, what we found, there are times at Moonshot where we're brought in where regionalization has already been on the table, and we're asked to go through a process of how to figure out whether the technical issues work, what's the steps. Most often, it's not originally on the table. It's there's a utility or a community that has a challenge, and you go in and look at the picture, and you can't help but come to this as one of the solutions to the problem. Our own perspective is that the place to start is almost never with regionalization and or any of those first. If what we do is evaluate, and I know all of your organizations do the same, we evaluate where are you? What are the things you need to do? What is your story of you have $10
$10
million
million.
of need and you have $1 million of revenue, so you have a $9 million shortfall, creating a financial picture of where you are if you do nothing
Yep.
opens the door for what are the things you could do that will change that financially for you and your constituents. And it sort of transforms the conversation. It isn't really about regionalization. This is how to save money for the people that you serve. And I think that just changes the
Yep.
dynamic for why and where the topic is raised.
Should focus on the economics. So, speaking of economics, Charles, you and Olga pointed out, and George, states are being asked to do more with less. There's less funding for technical assistance, and states are really struggling, at least the ones we're working with, are really struggling with what do we do with these systems? Trailer parks and other small communities where there may be 50 connections. And so, what do you say to those states that, are saying, okay, what's the next step? Because we're having states come to us and say, well, can you help us start these conversations? We've got 20 utilities that non-compliance or, are needing, massive amounts of funding to rebuild their infrastructure. What's the best advice to those state regulators and funders? Any of you. So, tee it up to.
From my perspective, I could start. I think there really needs to be an investment in technical assistance. Now, there already is technical assistance funding out there. All of us that are participating in this webinar to some degree are part of that and part of the pool. But there's still a shortfall. And the organizations that are working in the space right now are still not hitting all of the communities. There's still a lot of communities out there
Yep.
that are being untouched. And so at the National Rural Water Association, we're advocating for an independent pool from the federal government of technical assistance dollars. A lot of the technical assistance that rural development at USDA has and administers and even EPA has a lot of different purposes and
Mhm.
functions that technical assistance can go to. And we understand how important this is. And so while some of those dollars are used for regionalization and consolidation, when you do that, you also take that money away from some of the other initiatives that are just as important. And so there really needs to be a priority at the state and federal level on ensuring that the funding is available to make sure that there are those third party, unbiased practitioners that can go in and really provide that advice to the community and help them diagnose their challenges and then provide them with the opportunity for the solutions.
I'll jump in here. I would say I totally agree with what Charles says, but there's another piece to it, and the piece to that is the investment on the feasibility studies to evaluate all alternatives when we're talking about regionalization, because as we said before, it is a spectrum, and decision makers need to have the answers to their questions before they commit to anything, from a simple MOU agreement all the way to full consolidation, ownership transfer, and all of that needs to be evaluated, not only as an immediate need or as an immediate solution to, if it's a compliance issue, is it going to address the compliance issue? Absolutely, yeah. But what is it going to do on the long term to that community? And that is part of what is not being answered right now. And so the invitation is for the states to explore not only the short-term solution, but think long-term as an investment to create sustainable utilities, because if we just rush into this and we push everybody into consolidating, we potentially end up with another version of what we have right now. That is going to look different. None of us will be here to deal with that, but it's not really a very practical investment. And where I'm getting with that is that if we are really intentional, and I think that's where RCAP has been very good at working with communities and making sure that we empower them to think about what is their 20, 30, 40-year plan so that they can become financially viable to sustain over the long haul, not just deal with the immediate compliance issue that they have in front of them. That's the other part, the other danger of regionalization, that if you're reactive and you're just dealing with this here and now, 5 years from now, you might be dealing with a whole different set of issues. 3 years from now, when the honeymoon period is over, the community will be calling for technical assistance to undo, and there's no divorce option. And we've been caught in those situations. So I think we have the opportunity to ask funders and decision makers to really be intentional about this being a long-term sustainable solution as a country.
Really good points, Olga. We've got Jeremy asks, what have other states done to successfully expand TA capacity? Are you guys aware of some states that are successfully doing more with less, doing things differently?
Brent, I would say two things. One is I completely agree, by the way, endorse what Charles and Olga said, because my view is it's a three-part answer, at least. One is, and this was my experience doing budgeting at DC Water, we had a whole category of capital programs we never funded because we never had enough money, and it was called BBP. BBP. And I remember my CFO and I asked one meeting, what is in that category? What does it stand for? And BBP was Better Business Practices. And it were the projects that were designed to allow us to run more efficiently, not just to solve a problem. And we were like, and we're not funding this. So we took that topic and we made it a lens through which all projects were viewed. And that's to me what a state needs to ask when they're allocating funds. It relates to what Olga just said. You're not just fixing an issue with a problem, which may just kick the problem down to the next time it occurs, but are you evaluating return on investment, life cycle costs, all sorts of questions that will yield a different kind of project that saves money while it's improving performance? That's a perspective and a question that needs to be asked when projects are being formulated. Second is Olga is exactly right on. SRF and most funding is capital projects. And what we know is that if you put in a capital projects without the preliminary support to be able to evaluate, to be able to do that kind of, you almost never get to the right project. Or when you put it in, if you don't have funding to support to make sure operations, adaptive leadership, change management is in place, you may not benefit from the project in full measure. And that means being more expansive in how the projects are run. I'll give you a quick example, Brent. We were brought in by Maryland DEP to Dorchester County. It's right on the Chesapeake Bay, pretty low income rural community. And they had something called Bermed basins, which I had never heard of before. They're these lagoons, and they were failing and risking direct discharge into the Chesapeake. And what we were able to do is a two-part plan. One was how to close those down properly, but Maryland supported a project to connect Dorchester County to a regional authority for their wastewater rather than these basins. So the two matched up. And it's not finished yet, but I was impressed with how Maryland was willing to be open to that set of solutions, one of which was solving an immediate threat to the Chesapeake, and second, with a regionalization project of connecting to a regional authority for wastewater services, which everyone was better off on.
Good example. I think all of us are also aware of how Kentucky consolidated a lot of systems. They had 2,000 water utilities at one point, and then over time they consolidated those down to several hundred. And it wasn't without difficulty. It wasn't without lots of expense. Can one of you all kind of talk about that, Charles or George or Olga? When do you want to talk about that, and whether it's been successful? Because I do know there's been some challenges when you do interconnections. Sometimes the water can, in these systems, the water quality can become stale, or so it's not always a panacea. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just add, um, yeah, I mean, there have been challenges kind of in the long term that the state has worked through and continue to work through. But the reason that Kentucky is kind of textbook example of how it can work, and this kind of answers the question that was asked in the chat. I mean, I think a lot of the states are struggling to find a solution. I personally don't know of any right now that's kind of on the forefront of have found a way to fund all of this stuff outside of the Kentucky model. But it took the entire village. So the state and the governor made a commitment. They were able to also leverage some federal resources. They went around and they got buy-in from all of the systems and local communities, local governing structures, mayors, town heads, etc. And so the only reason it worked was because of that buy-in and that um, uh, kind of input from every level of government and private. And so that's kind of the most important, I think, piece to understand. And it goes into what everyone's been saying so far, which I completely agree with. Like even Olga, once you get into this, you can't divorce out. So you've really got to build that partnership from the beginning. And it takes, in order for it to work, it's going to take all of the pieces
Hmm.
kind of working together in order to make it happen.
So Charles, that buy-in was absolutely critical with Kentucky. How do we do that in other states? I'm surprised we have not seen that same level of focus on consolidation and regionalizing anywhere else. A lot of those funds came from tobacco settlement. I know that money was available, but why haven't we seen any thoughts of why we haven't seen that anywhere else to the same degree?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it really again, it's going to require all the folks in the states. It's hard. That's why it's only happened once and probably hasn't happened yet again. Although I think it can. These conversations are what's going to start driving that to start happening. But I think it really starts with the TA providers being able to get in there and build trust in the communities. And once there's trust in those communities, and they're getting on board, it can filter up. Um, one thing that I think can make the whole process go awry is when you have more of a top-down approach, kind of forcing it. So I think working community by community and building that synergy can start to build a leverage within the states.
If I'll jump in here, and one thing I
Please
would
do.
add to what Charles said. One of the reasons that regionalization is challenging, and I think you all have heard me say that, is the human piece. We have the engineering capacity and the technical capacity to address those pieces of the infrastructure. We might actually be able to get the funding, but you have the human part, and that is the most difficult part to deal with, and that is what is going to slow down the process. But it's also the most critical piece to make sure that these projects really do become part of a long-term solution. And by that, I'm specifically referring to the communities themselves. The other thing is that, and it's an invitation to all of us to think about regionalization. When we talk regionalization or when we talk consolidation, it doesn't automatically mean physical interconnect. And that is another part of the conversation that has happened a lot across the country in a lot of places, where people get very, very sensitive and touchy about the term even being brought up because of experiences that they've had, or either themselves or others. And so when we're talking about regionalization, at least from the RCAP perspective, is about bringing regional solutions. Nobody's talking about interconnecting, because physical interconnect might not be a viable solution. We might not have the money to go over a hill or bore through a mountain to physically interconnect. Where other areas of can we improve the economies of scale through? And it does not have to be the physical interconnect approach always. It can be sometimes, but a lot of times it's not, and we need to be okay with that.
Right.
Yeah,
Olga, you talk. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, you asked a fascinating question as to why this hasn't happened in more states. And my reaction is it's the same challenge that always unfolds whenever new approaches are considered, which is adaptive leadership. When I used to run an SRF office. These people are working hard. They often have less resources and people-wise that they used to have. And they have a system set up for how to evaluate and select projects on which they are measured. How many projects did you get out? How many funds did you get out? Those of us who've been in EPA know that's how your beans every year. Going in this direction, my reaction is going to take a longer period of time to develop and propose these kinds of solutions, whether they be interconnect or not. And that's just a completely different frame of reference and selection of how to investigate. And that means everybody's changing their jobs. And as Olga said, that's hard to do. And that's not because of anything that's wrong. It's that I knew I'm judged on this, and now we're going to do this whole other thing. And that's a challenge. I also completely agree on this question of an interconnect. There was some of the questions of regionalization or consolidation. At DC Water, we used to share procurement of key items with other utilities. We were big. It saved us money. Didn't mean we were doing something, connecting with another utility. It's just we jointly worked with other utilities to do a similar thing. Water utilities on a technical basis are way more alike than they're different. And there's lots of things that they can do together where by sharing the cost of procuring something or sharing an operator who's a specialist on some kind of sensor that you put in, that you save money without, maybe that leads to, that's a trust building step to some point being more oriented towards a fuller consolidation. But where to start? And it's always, to me, money. Let's show that we can save the people in this community cash money by doing these steps. And then what's the next one? Get some momentum and keep going.
Yeah. So George and Olga, you kind of talked about the people element of this. George, from the regulators, it's hard. They're doing their jobs that they've, got to get certain check boxes and things. And Olga, you talked about, at the community level, these are sometimes very complex social. I remember living in Texas. I mean, small communities in Texas, it was about football, and you hated your next door neighbor. And there was, hell no, I'm not going to actually consider ever working with them. So you have those social issues. But my experience, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, isn't there often one community, kind of a lead community, that says, listen, we want to do this, and then we'll take the lead to work with communities around, say, listen, how can we work together to better manage our water resources and reduce costs for all of us?
Yeah, there's usually a leader, but that leader also needs to be good enough of a leader to recognize that he or she can only plant the seed and let others step up to the invitation. Because one leader can have great ideas, but if there's a lot of history, as to the point that you just described, Brent, that happens in every community that we go into. There's a history about either football or someone marrying the wrong person from across the other side of the tracks, whatever the story might be. In a lot of cases, it happened 40 years ago and nobody remembers why, but they still cannot get them to sit at the same table. We normally do have emerging leaders that come up to that space. And then, the rest of the work, then it can be handed over to a group of technical assistance providers like us or Rural Water to help facilitate the conversations. They are the ones that are saying, we would be interested in having a conversation. Can we convene? But they're not the ones convening. And I can tell you that sometimes when they are the ones convening, that's where everybody else guards will go up, and that's as far as you get. And then you won't get them to sit at the same table for another 5 years.
You really a neutral facilitator in order to make this happen.
Yes.
And take baby steps. So talk about the benefits and where each community can find common ground Um, we've got another question here that on P3s. Question is, there are very few instances of P3s and public-private partnerships in water sector. Where does regionalization connect with P3s? Do you see them to have better efficiencies and cost savings than P3s? Anyone want to take that?
My reaction, Brent, on P3s is more financial than operational. It's certainly true that there are organizations that are private that can help do these projects. My experience is that sometimes raises questions early on in the process that are not always helpful. But where I'm very hopeful is that, as we have all described, at the spectrum of all the things that can be shared all the way up to actual consolidation, the cost savings can be breathtaking. And when there is a return on investment that can be generated by a project that's done collaboratively, there's an opportunity for private investment to pay for the project faster than any state or federal funding because they can share in the ROI of the return. And we need more money. That doesn't, no, however it comes out with state and federal money, there's not enough. But with the positive outcome, this is an investable type of project, in my view, in almost every case. And that to me is where P3 is most likely to come in, which is there's a lot of good investment impact money that would like to have good outcomes. We can deliver good outcomes and a return in these kinds of projects and move fast and deliver outcomes to a community that's quick. And some of the problems in these is even when you decide to do something, it takes a very long time to put the application together, to get it reviewed, that's a long lead time. And private money could shrink that so we get results quicker.
It's a really good point. Questions that we've just had. The question says, how do we pay for the project? Our city has already paid and obtained the engineering work and buy-in of the two closest water departments to create an interconnect to allow us to supply and or buy water. The big stopping point is none of us have the budget. So come talk to you, George. Is that right? Or come talk to you, Olga or Charles?
Sounds like they started about it the wrong way.
Well, they've got the buy-in, it sounds. It sounds like they just need the money to finish.
Yeah, Gene, I would say reach out to any one of us because we have thoughts on how to do that. It would be interesting I don't know where you're located, Gene. There are some private funders out there that are interested in this kind of impact investment. WFX is really good at this, by the way. I'm not trying to.
Well, thank you, George. So.
This question of how to put together a deal that makes sense if the project has already been baked. It's a great question to have. And any of us would love to have that trying to figure out a solution to that question.
Well, it looks like Gene is from Berryville, Texas. So, and Alan's got a question here. Are there any tried and true strategies to show the benefits of regionalization of a system that is operating well to a system that is plagued with issues? I often think of our friend Bill Teichmiller at EJ Water. And how they have consolidated. In many cases, they have communities coming to them and with 50 connections say, we just can't afford it. And so, I would say EJ Water is a good example. And George or Olga, Charles, you have any other good examples that people can point to?
We have a lot of good examples. I mean, over 20 years, we've done over 300 of this regionalizations that look very, very different. So we probably have a version of more than one of an example. Yeah, we definitely have. And that is part of the reason why we continue to push the needle on this in this space is because we have seen the benefits of bringing entities together, creating the economies of scale, bringing solutions, long-term solutions. And to the earlier question, it would be great if we can get the private investors in this space. But the reality is the projects that we're talking about are not small enough that are attractive in a lot of cases. So that is another ceiling that to George's point earlier, this is not specific to small systems. It just so happened that RCAP moves in the very small space. However, this is conversation that is happening at the mid-sized systems and larger systems as well. And so I can see where large or mid-sized projects would attract that kind of investment.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, we all know, I mean, we've heard the numbers, the billions of dollars in shortfall, that and how much money it's going to take to build the infrastructure back up kind of across the sector. And when you look at the available sources right now, especially the SRF, you've got large systems and small systems all competing for the same pot of money. And so, depending on what state you're in and what project is going to look more attractive and how you can get the money out faster, and all these different things that go into the decision making process can really hamstring a project. But I think that's what I would say from a hope standpoint is why it's so important for these communities to really connect with a good TA provider, because
Mm.
um, this TA providers like NRWA, RCAP, Moonshot, they've worked with a lot of different entities. And so they've got usually ways to try to make it work and help that community put in an application in a different space. So, if SRF's not going to be the answer, you still have rural development is a great tool for funding projects for small communities. And then there's also state initiatives that folks will know about, and there is some private money out there, and different alternatives. And so getting with the TA providers that kind of can see all of the different avenues and are not maybe just single focused on one source is going to be the best way to get that project over the finish line.
Charles, I've obviously had a lot of experience with USDA, serving as a former USDA official. Do you see a change at all in any of the federal funders, whether it's EPA or even the state SRFs, USDA on regionalization and consolidating? Because ultimately, you're going to have fewer systems that are competing for funds over time as you get fewer systems that are better performing, and you're going to have much better impact, less impact on the federal fisc and the state fisc.
Yeah, I think, what we're starting to see from my perspective is a different focus from the federal level. And I can very highly speak about from USDA's perspective right now, where they're really encouraging the use of whether it's regionalization or consolidation or a standard infrastructure project. They're really pushing the TA providers now, and it was even just in their last TAT solicitation to really look at all the different models before a project is just being funded. We've always just kind of went through the traditional, okay, this community needs this upgrade, you just fund the project and move forward. And again, kind of like to George's point earlier, we're not really necessarily always looking at the long-term impact or what that's going to do to the system down the road. And so what they're really encouraging now is a full circle view before they're approving projects to say, okay, have you looked at every single option? Have you looked at every alternative? We may fund this project, but have you looked at regionalization consolidation? Have you looked at, some communities are decentralized, and maybe a centralized project isn't necessarily in their best interest. It's going to bankrupt them. Maybe shoring up what they have. There's all these different options at the table. And so I think they're trying to push the TA providers to ensure that we're making the best decision, the community is making the best decisions with the money available that's going to help them be sustainable long term.
Yeah, Charles, you raise a good point too that we really haven't talked about. Is it's not all about centralizing. In many cases, it's decentralization. And Dr. Kevin White in Alabama and his team are looking at kind of cluster systems where you have very sparse populations that really cannot afford a centralized system. So, are you seeing that more and more with your state partners, that type of interest in those decentralized systems?
Yes, we are, especially down there in Alabama and kind of the Black Belt area. We've seen that in Dr. White been working with him for many years, and so and again, I think that there was a time when that was looked at as the less attractive option, but now it's being looked at as a potential solution that again is going to have long-term impact for the community, and so that they'll be sustainable. Because what we don't want is to have a system that has massive legacy debt that they cannot take care of, and it puts them into a situation where they will not be able to be fixed. I mean, we're talking about regionalization and consolidation today in this discussion, and we're working with systems right now. I've got one system in particular. They've got $20 million in loans still from a project that probably shouldn't have been constructed to begin with. They're they're able to treat 1.6 million gallons a day and are only doing about 600,000. No system's taking them over. They've offered everybody the keys, but with that type of legacy debt, that adds a whole nother kind of component into the conversation. And so, really trying to ensure that again we're setting those systems up for success down the road is very important.
Olga, George, any thoughts on that?
Go ahead,
I
Olga.
I will say I agree with Charles. Having been worked in communities and project development myself for many, many years, there are a lot of projects that you say, why? Why? Because you're settling the community, or the community is locked into a debt for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And their debt capacity is maxed out to the point that during that period, nothing else better go wrong, because they are just that close to a catastrophe. And so that is not sustainable practice. So we are starting to see funding agencies that are prioritizing how the projects are funded and how they're going to be paid and how we are, able to develop these projects. The other thing I will say is that I was a technical assistance provider for many years, and I was a regulator prior to that. So I've seen, both sides of the work. But one of the things that I will say is that years ago, this is like probably 18 years ago, I was able to walk into USDA and bring an application for a project, and I would be able to walk out of there with, say, 75% grant, 25% loan. Life was good. Today, that is not going to happen. That ratio has been completely reversed and increased. If we get 10% grant, that's a good day. So the communities haven't grown. The number of the number of connections hasn't changed. Unless you triple, quadruple, or more the rates, that project is not viable for that community, because the funding packages are not really aligning with what's going on the ground. And that is a reality that we all have to own as a country. The grant dollars are no longer coming back, and they're not around for the sustainability of this project. So what else? What is the out of the box solution to help us get to make sure that those people are still able to have access to safe drinking water?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I anticipated the conversation today would focus a lot on funding. Well, where the heck are we going to get the funding to do all of this? One of our attendees raises a really good question and points out that a data point for all of us: one data center in Louisiana, largest on the planet, backed by Meta and Blue Owl Capital, raised $27 billion solely through capital markets. By comparison, the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act set aside $55 billion for all U.S. water infrastructure. Why are we only discussing government funds in 2025? Is there a role for Meta? Is there a role for Google and Amazon in these communities, particularly when a lot of data centers are going in? Is there an opportunity here for those large companies and investors to invest in rural infrastructure?
Brent, I'll at least take that on as well. First, a lot of the conversation went on, I completely agree with. And on the question of the decentralized issue, I think one of the changes is that technology now exists that allow decentralized systems to be managed and operated, and you don't have to be on site. That was not true 10 years ago. So the technology has moved to allow a different set of solutions. So you're not trying to, as Olga said, take the pipe over the mountain and connect systems which are separate for a reason, and it's geography.
Right.
Second, I also didn't want to let Alan's question go by. I think the issue of how a utility accepts another's connection, if it does happen, if they have existing liabilities and costs, it's something we immediately see every time. Why would a utility do that? What do I get out of it? So having a cost structure that somehow benefits the receiving utility is fundamental. But on the question you just asked, we are doing work at Moonshot. Every one of the major technology firms, Meta, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, have all made commitments to replenish more water than they're using in their data centers by 2030. when they first started doing that, it was like replenishing water in other places. And the comment was, no, you've got to replenish water where you're using it. So now the geography of those replenishment commitments is narrowed. And then the next question was, why not with the utility that's providing you the water? So that if Meta or one of these firms can pay for a water replenishment project at the utility, A, they can meet their commitment. B, they can help ensure that the water that they're supplied is more resilient. And C, if it's reducing the cost of that utility, it reduces costs to all their ratepayers. So that would mean harnessing, as the person asked, the financial benefits and commitments that these companies have made in order to find a new funding source. Again, it's on a completely different time frame as well. These companies are moving fast. They've committed to do this by 2030. And their water use is huge. So I think the question is a great one, and we should absolutely tap these resources because it's also the right thing to do. This is pressing a lot of utilities. Can they provide the water or not? And without reducing I&I and reducing the water loss, there are ways that can be done. Let's have it paid not by ratepayers, but by the firms who are now using so much of the water.
Yep, really good points. I also want to talk about some of the barriers, the regulatory or state barriers that we see in some of the states where we are working WFX. We know that you have a community that's got the resources and the desire, wants to lead, but they can't borrow money for its nearby neighbor. And so there's certain structures, legal structures that need to be put into place. I know Chad from Texas talks about a new law that was passed there this past year, SB 1169, that creates public utility agencies that actually have the authority to borrow and to regionalize. Are you guys, do you have any experience with this in other states? How's it working in the states where you all are? Are there barriers? Do states need to consider changing their laws to make it easier to regionalize? I do know that the jurisdictional issues, some states say that utilities can't spend outside their jurisdiction, municipalities. And so, there's those issues and kind of antiquated laws that can stand in the way that states and communities need to focus on.
There was a comment from Melanie Delgado that says that funding agencies need policies that support regional projects, and she could not be more spot on with that comment, because over the last 20 years of doing this kind of work, it has been an uphill battle, pushing against agencies that have a very rigid framework on how to fund, how to prioritize project and all of those things, because regionalization didn't fit into that square box. And so it has been a really very difficult work of educating, advocating, and pushing, because the boundaries have been established and have been in place for such a long time. And, you're bringing this multi-headed monster into the picture that has not fit into the picture before, and nobody knows what to do with it. It's not only on the funding side, it's on the regulatory side, it's on the compliance side with state and federal and everything. So the human element is not only an issue at the community level, it's at the agencies level, at the regulatory agencies and at the funding agencies. We all need to get out of that very antiquated system and mindset of this is how we do things, because that is really only slowing down what we're trying to do and what we're trying to bring to solution. It's really entertaining when you see in the applications that, you're getting additional scores or additional points for regionalization. What does that look like? Because we don't have just the four of us here and the ones that are joining us. There's not a standardized definition of what regionalization is and or consolidation is. And so when we don't have an agreement on that, it's very much the same as defining disadvantage in New York State as defining disadvantage in Arizona. We're not talking about the same thing. And so there's a lot of foundational pieces that still need to be built or reinforced to support what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Charles, National Rural Water Association recently came out with guiding principles on consolidation. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of maybe recap those and also let us, what what's in store. And Olga, I'd love to tee that up for you as well to find out what RCAP might have in the future. So
Yeah, so we recently published our own guiding principles, and I think a lot of the other associations and groups have agreed with, generally speaking, what we've come out with. This is not new, obviously. We've been talking regionalization and consolidation for many years. There's been papers put out, there's been work done. We've had these kind of conversations, but there's a lot of narratives that have been out there that we didn't necessarily always agree with, and so we wanted to make sure that that the principles that were out there could apply in general terms to all of these communities, and there's four. And the first one is that consolidation must be voluntary. We believe that the key to success is voluntary action at the discretion of the water systems local governing board, citizens in the communities. Those communities should make the decisions as best for them and in their best interest. And because they're going to be the ones that live with the long-term impact of consolidation. And as we've talked about, sometimes it doesn't work. And so having their buy-in, having their understanding, and having their uh, decision making in the process is so critical. Also, trusted local partner support. We've been talking about TA providers and having those third party non-biased sources that have nothing to gain from the transaction, aren't, as George said, not selling anything, coming in, doing a diagnosis like a doctor, and then presenting options that are going to work for the community is critical. Where there's nothing to gain. The third one is funding for communities most in need. We've been just talking about it. There's far more need than there are dollars available, and I think we are getting creative, and we're trying to find ways to stretch the federal dollars and bring in private partnerships, but really ensuring that the federal dollars that are available are going to the communities that most need it. And and then the fourth is kind of addressing all of the things that we've been discussing, is presenting for some incentives to make this easier. And one on the financial side, we have a, a request right now through the um, Senate and House Agriculture Committee that they're working in through the Farm Bill, and it's looking promising, that would allow in the rural development title and in that funding piece, a local contiguous neighbor community who's in good standing with rural development be able to apply for the subsidy on behalf of that failing community that's next door to them. So they could use that money to connect them or to build out the infrastructure or to set up the management structure, whatever the case may be, however the long-term solution would look. But that would help that community be able to help their neighbors and then not be a burden to their current ratepayers.
yeah, that would be huge, Charles, and maybe you can share with us too, where people can find out more information about that pending legislation. So, George, we're talking a lot about local partners, how to make this work, who's needed. As we know, there's a lot of local engineers that advise these communities. You, as a technical assistance provider, kind of on our operations, are always, trying to work with the local engineers. Sometimes there's a different perspective. Local engineers, want to hold on to that client, want to build out, and there's some tension sometimes between TA providers and local engineers. How have you what advice would you have for communities that are, calling in today?
Sure.
How do you, so
It's a fantastic question, and it relates to back when I ran DC Water. Everybody I met was trying to sell me something, including my own staff. Everyone had a stake in a decision, and what I craved was, who can I talk to who understands the pressures I'm under,
Yep.
and has no interest at all except offering the best advice that they can. And I didn't find that except friends and family, because everyone else had a stake in the matter. And I'll give a shameless shout out to the groups that you see here: National Rural Water, RCAP, WFX, Moonshot. As Charles just said, the most important element, and why we don't often get in conflict with local engineers, we don't actually do the engineering plans. We enable work. So there will be work coming from the suggestions that any of us offer. But the magic is that the utility leads or the community leads know that we have no interest whatsoever but their success in a way that's sustainable. So we're not going to suggest a project that we don't think they can operate. We're not going to suggest a project that we don't think they can fund. And we will suggest that they not do projects, as Olga said. We've seen this a lot,
Exactly.
where there are projects that are on that. It's not that that's a bad project. It's not the right project.
Right.
And we don't
So
have any
getting a
stake in
second
it.
opinion is often a good
An
thing, whether it's a
independent
doctor or
nonprofit. What's the commonality
yeah,
of us? We're nonprofit, we're independent,
right.
unbiased professionals with only your interest in mind. And with local engineers, we've always made it clear once we get to the conclusion of what the work is, you're going to be front and center on that. When
Hmm.
the actual design has to be done, when the actual construction has to be done, we don't do that. We are enabling, we think, the best kind of decision making, working in partnership with the community. And then there's going to be work. And it can hopefully unlock, not
That's great.
more work, not less.
Well, we are coming up at the top of the hour. I want to close, give you all each a chance to either speak directly to communities that are considering this or states that are trying to figure out how the heck can we do more regionalization. What is the one bit of advice that each of you would have as we close today's discussion? And Charles, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, I
One
think,
bit of advice.
yeah, build trust and consensus and go from there.
Olga.
I have I have recommendations definitely for the communities that are possibly exploring. Work with someone that is going to honor your identity, your values, your culture, your essence as a community, and have them work with you as an individual and make sure that they respect what you stand for and contribute to the process, support you through the process. I would say, to technical assistance providers, to all the technical assistance providers that are on this call that are supporting these communities, elevate them and empower them to own the process and to be part of the solution, because all the idea behind all of this is to get to a long-term solution, make the communities own that solution as their own, because we all move on to the next project. As technical assistance providers, we have plenty of other projects to get to. The community needs to own it. And
Got
to
to be
the
vested.
states, yes. And to the states, it's time to invest in the human element of this process. We know very well how to invest in tangible infrastructure, but unless we invest in the process that it takes to build trust, to get past the human pieces, this is not going to work.
Words.
Brent, I strongly endorse what we've just heard. I would say one thing in particular, having been a state and federal regulator, which is think of your funding scheme with regionalization in mind.
Hmm.
Trying to do funding using the scheme that was set up for capital projects in an immediate term and doing something else with it, it's really hard because the system wasn't set up. If it wouldn't, I don't think it would take that long. How would we change or have sort of a route with a set of different steps that is oriented towards this and create it? So then we're running a game that's consistent with the outcome rather than trying to do something where the system was never set up with this in mind. And
Right.
that's one thing that a state or feds could do that I think would be really helpful.
That's great. So, Charles, Olga, George, can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us. I think that there's going to be a lot more conversation, hopefully less talking and more doing as time goes on. So those that have called in who are considering regionalizing, want more information, please reach out to the folks, organizations here. I know we're all excited about talking and sharing our perspective and working with each of you. So on that note, thank you all again for your generous time and the passion and commitment that you have to helping these communities. Have a great day.